Hope everyone had a lovely weekend, and I'm delighted to get back to The Hobbit today, where we will spend a little bit more time going through the chapter Flies and Spiders. And we are on the top of 174, so I will start there. That night they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food, and next morning when they woke, the first thing they noted was that they were still gnawingly hungry, and the next thing was it was raining, and that here and there the drip of it was dropping heavily on the forest floor. That only reminded them that they were also partially thirsty, without doing anything to relieve them. You cannot quench a terrible thirst by standing under giant oaks and waiting for a chance drip to fall on your tongue. The only scrap of comfort there was came unexpectedly from Bomber. He woke up suddenly and sat up, scratching his head. He could not make out where he was at all, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house, and they had great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all the many adventures they had had since. When he heard that there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly in the legs. "Why did I ever wake up?" he cried. "I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches and fires burning on the ground. And there was a great feast going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was a merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink." "You need not try," said Foreign. "In fact, if you can't talk about something else, you'd better be silent. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to your idiotic dreams in the forest. You're no joke to carry even after weeks of short commons." There was nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts round their empty stomachs and hoist their empty sacks and packs, and trudge along the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. This they did all that day, going very slowly and warily, while Bumper kept on wailing that his legs would not carry him, and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. "No, you don't," they said. "Let your legs take their share. We have carried you far enough." All the same, he suddenly refused to go a step further, and flung himself on the ground. "Go on if you must," he said. "I'm just going to lie here and sleep and dream of food. If I can't get it any other way, I hope I never wake up again." At that very moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, "What was that? I thought I saw a twinkle of light in the forest." They all looked, and a longish way off, it seemed, they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another, and another sprang out beside it. Even Bomber got up, and they hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them, and to the left of the path, and when at last they had drawn level with it, seemed plain that torches and fires were burning under the trees, not a good way off the track. "It looks as if my dreams were coming true," gasped Bomber, puffing up behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the woods after the lights, but the others remembered only too well the warnings of the wizards and of Bourne. "A feast would me no good if we never got back alive for it," said Foreign. "But without a feast we shan't remain alive much longer anyway," said Bomber, and Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed at length to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. But then they could not agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, in spite of warnings, hunger decided them, because Bomber kept on describing all the good things that were being eaten, according to his dream, in the woodland feast, so they all left the path and plunged into the forest together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered round the trunks and looked into a clearing where some trees had been felled and the ground levelled. There were many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown and sitting on sawn rings of the felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in their midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees round about. But most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of the roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult with one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire and it went up in rockets of glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not even find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After blundering frantically in the gloom, falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles, at last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by torch. By that time they had, of course, quite forgotten in what direction the path lay, and they were all hopelessly lost, at least till morning. There was nothing for it but to settle down for the night where they were, and they did not even dare to search on the ground for scraps of food for fear of becoming separated again. But they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only just getting drowsy, when Dorry, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a loud whisper, "The lights are coming out again over there, and there are more than ever of them." Up they all jumped. There, sure enough, not far away, were scores of twinkling lights, and they heard the voices and the laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly towards them in a single line, each touching the back of the one in front. When they got near, Forin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one is to stir from hiding till I say. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." What about me, of them? Thought Bilbo. And anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him. When they got to the edge of the circle of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forwards into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. Out went all the lights again, and complete darkness fell. It had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time, and they simply could not find the Hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it only made 13. They shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins! Hobbit! You dratted Hobbit! Hey, Hobbit! Confusticate you! Where are you?" and other things of that sort. But there was no answer. They were just giving up hope when Dorry stumbled across him by sheer luck. In the dark he fell over what he thought was a log, and he found it was a hobbit, curled up, fast asleep. It took a great deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake he was not pleased at all. "I was having such a lovely dream," he grumbled, "all about having a most gorgeous dinner." "Good heavens, he's gone just like Bomba," they said. "Don't tell us about dreams. Dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them." "They are the best I'm likely to get in this beastly place," he muttered, as he lay down beside the dwarfs and tried to go back to sleep and find his dream again. But this was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Killy, who was watching them, came and roused them all again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of light begun not far away. Hundreds of torches and many fires must have been lit suddenly and by magic. And hark to the singing and the harps." After lying and listening for a while, they found they could not resist the desire to go nearer and try once more to get help. Up they got again, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king, with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much as Bomba had described in the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted on their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Foreign into their midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of a word. Out went all the lights. The fires leaped up in black smokes. Ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarfs, and the wood was filled again with their clamour and their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling, "Dorry, Norry, Orry, Oin, Gloin, Filly, Killy, Bomba, Bifur, Bofur, Dwalin, Balin, Forin, Oakenshield," while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all round him, with an occasional "Bilbo" thrown in. But the cries of others got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. This was one of his most miserable moments, but he soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything till day came with some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about, tiring himself out with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself down with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts. I've lost my place there. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him. Something like a strong sticky string was against his left hand, and when he tried to move he found that his legs were already wrapped in the same stuff, so that when he got up he fell over. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abdominal threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him to keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and stuck it with its sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke, and then he fell down and remembered nothing for a long while. There was the usual dim grey light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow the killing of the giant spider all alone by himself in the dark, without the help of the wizard or the dwarfs or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach, as he wiped his sword on the grass and put it back into its sheath. "I will give you a name," he said to it, "and I shall call you Sting." After that he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off unless they had been made prisoners by the elves, or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while wondering in what direction the path lay, and in what direction he should go first to look for the dwarfs. "Oh, why did we not remember Bjorn's advice and Gandalf's?" he lamented. "What a mess we are now in! I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone." In the end he made as good a guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help had come. Did you hear my doggy barking there? I think that might be the end of my story today, and I am going to see if he can find his friends tomorrow.